Maggie, would you like to introduce yourself and today's topic?
Thank you, Erica. I am Maggie. I have recently started working with this lovely bunch of people. And as my first kickabout topic, I wanted to discuss burnout. Very cheerful of me, right? But I think it is important. I had a look online and did some research on this. And I knew that it was a big issue to begin with, but some of the figures that I found out were much higher than I even expected. So it turns out that 79 of UK employees and 70% of US employees have experienced burnout at least once in their life. We've had a global pandemic, which means most of us underwent a huge change in our work and private life. We had to adapt to a new style of working, often involving isolation, restricted access to resources, as well as restricted communication with our peers. So 40% of the workforce reported experiencing some level of burnout during the pandemic period, with symptoms like feeling drained, having a negative outlook on things, increased self-doubt, feelings of overwhelm, and significantly impacted productivity. Burnout can have a very severe impact on an individual as well as a business level, because what affects our workforce on such a scale also affects our businesses, right? And we can see that we are amidst a period of resignation rates being so high that we've actually given it a name, the Great Resignation. It's not a secret to anyone that the job market is facing an all-time high rates of employees fleeing their jobs, high demand for talent, very low supply. 40% of people who leave their jobs do so not for the right reasons, not because they're pursuing higher salaries or natural job progression, but to seek a better work environment. So how do we help our clients, our peers, our colleagues to prevent this from happening to them? We talk about it, right? Um, so one of the issues with burnout is that it can be a difficult topic to discuss. A lot of people still feel shame to admit, even only to themselves, that things aren't going great, that they are burning the candle at both ends. And kind of, it's tempting to compartmentalize the issue, which we know only fuels it, right? We're burnt out, we make mistakes. What do we do to correct them? We work harder. So frustration grows because we're not satisfied with our own work. And it's perpetual vicious cycle, like a self-feeding monster in a way. I think there's also a fear, like, what would my boss and colleagues think? Would I lose my job over this? Or in leadership, would my employees lose respect for me? Vulnerability can be a challenge, and I kind of want to use this platform to raise awareness on the subject and help people understand that burnout is very human. Like, you heard the stats. If 80% of us have experienced it, then it's a normal part of the human experience. And I think we as extroverts, I mean, I haven't been with you for too long, but I'm starting to get the feeling that you are kind of extroverted. um,
Simon's not. Very quiet, aren't you, Simon?
Here we go. I'm learning.
But I think we should use that voice, Simon. We shouldn't be quiet. Just to help, like, raise awareness and encourage those who are talented, but perhaps less outspoken, less comfortable speaking up for themselves than this particular group is, to see the strength and the benefit to admitting to burnout, because a problem acknowledged makes finding solutions the easy part. So I kind of want to chew the fat a little bit with you guys today, share some experiences, user expertise as consultants, our agile expertise. How can we help them work smart instead of hard, and build and sustain a happy and productive workforce that is flaming out rather than burning out? So what are your perspectives? Have you experienced burnout personally?
So I guess also why one of the reasons that we feel that this is quite important that we needed to discuss as well was the fact it is so relevant to the agile ways of working, simply because teams no longer have sort of a slow build up of a project and then chaos and then a respite and then the next project starts again, because most organizations that are running agile ways of working, it's a sustained approach and there is no respite. So unless it's designed to be healthy, then there'll be increasing levels of burnout with sort of staff and people working in this way.
Surely you're not assuming that leadership enable teams to build in enough slack so they don't suffer burnout continuously? Surely not.
I mean,
It is in the agile principles. It's in there. Developers and users must be able to maintain a constant pace, sustainable pace indefinitely. So yeah, I think
I
it's
thought Simon
crystal.
just went to read the principles and come back.
I've read it. He's right.
I can confirm. Yeah, no, I've definitely had it. Definitely faced the burnout thing, and yeah, I think you're right, Simon. It's very easy when you're doing just sprint to sprint to sprint. Like, what's your reward for completing a sprint? Oh, great, it's another one, and it can become just churn. And that's, I mean, I'm not like trying to big up safe for selling safe here, especially, but that is one of the benefits that I think about the PI model and how that works is you have that sort of expansion contraction, and we've got goals and we work towards them, we meet our objectives, and then we all take a collective like deep breath and then move into the next increment. And that is a real benefit, I think, of that model. I think so when I was burnt out, what did it for me was I was just lacking purpose, and it was in a job where my purpose there was no longer clear. Like I'd done the piece of transformation effort, the change was made, and then there was nothing really for me to do, and it was sort of a permanent position, and I just didn't really have anything to do. And like, it sort of sounds nice at first, like, oh, you could just sort of relax for a bit, but then after a few weeks, you're sort of twiddling your thumbs. If you don't have something to drive at and something to push at, I think that's innate to how we operate as humans, is that we need to be striving for something and achieving for something. Otherwise, life just doesn't really have any meaning. And I think that is definitely one of the ways you can get burnout, is just not having that clear purpose. And I think we see that in teams as well, where maybe the product vision is not clear or the business vision isn't clear, and people are just sort of thrashing around, oh, well, we're busy and we're doing stuff, but you never really get the recognition of how has it added value to the business or to the user. And then it just feels like energy that you're expending with no payoff. And that's what it is for me. It's just constantly expending energy, whether it's personal or as a team or as a business, and not getting a payoff.
That's interesting. So wait, are you saying you had burnout because you didn't have enough to do? Because that's an interesting concept.
Yeah, partly, or because the stuff that I was doing, I didn't feel like it mattered.
So I guess there's a massive difference then between self-inflicted burnout, because if you're doing something and you really care about it, and you see the benefit of doing it, then you do work harder, right? You do work longer hours and you do put the extra effort in to get it done, but you don't suffer the burnout. Yeah, because I can work on something that I really care about or really enjoy, and I put more hours in and I don't suffer from burnout. Maybe that's why. Maybe because it's not maybe because it is self-inflicted, rather than being told you have to work this number of hours, you have to achieve this task rather than this goal. That's probably where you get burnout, because it's inflicted upon you.
I think it's the sort of level of period or the duration of that sort of work as well. I mean, we often work very long hours, and then we'll have some chill out days, and so it's not hardcore with what we do. We move across different customers. So the one time I truly had burnout was years ago. I was working for a pharmaceutical organization, and up until that point, sort of there'd been, I was always sort of fated as the one that was going to be able to deliver stuff. And so therefore I was given this project that was carnage, pure carnage. The previous PM had been sacked, took it over, and I was working ridiculously long hours. And the problem is it became all consuming. There was no respite, there was no break. And after about 6 months of working like that, with sort of not going out, not spending any time with family, just work, it became far too much, and I burnt out. It was borderline depression. I would sort of, it probably was, but I was reacting in weird and wonderful ways towards my colleagues, and it was because it's only sort of afterwards I realised that I burnt out. And then it's how do you create sort of coping mechanisms to deal? We'll talk about that later, but how do you then create a more sustainable way of working so that doesn't happen again? So that never happened again. That was 2004, I think it was.
I think all of us are quite appreciative that none of us were your colleagues. I dread to think what the weird and wonderful ways that
Am I allowed to swear? So I think everyone has those experiences, and I think the problem is everyone's going to have those sort of experiences, but there's no such thing as the hero. You think, I'm different, I can handle it, and all of a sudden you enter an environment or a situation where you discover you're just the same as everyone else, and it happens. And then, okay, how do I create something which is more manageable for the future?
It's really interesting listening to you guys, because although the outcome of both of your stories was the same, you both burnt out, it seems like there's two distinct pathways of getting there that were quite different. So Simon, with you, it sounded like it was the kind of cumulative effect of trying to do too much, too fast, not necessarily having the right resource, high expectations, unforgiving deadlines, struggled with the team, which is very different to what Graham described, which sounded a bit more like perhaps a bit of a lack of purpose and a lack of development, a lack of perceived development. So not necessarily too much work, but maybe not the right type of work.
Is that fair, Graham? Is that how it felt?
Yeah.
So I guess, is there something there around not just workload, but also what that workload brings to you as an individual, how you view it, if it's not productive, if it doesn't help you grow?
Yeah, I 100% agree with that, and I also relate absolutely to what Graham and Simon are saying. I mean, it is a you have to be quite open about this, right? I mean, I have definitely experienced burnout multiple times, and I've been working for about 20 years or so now. So it's kind of been at different stages, just as a professional, then as a father with kids and all that kind of stuff, different stages of my career. And I guess every single time I've ever had a burnout, it's because I'm just not, it's never been because I'm not enjoying myself. Sorry, let me say that again. Anytime I've ever had a burnout, it's because I'm not happy with something around however we're working in some manner. It could be from strategically the direction that we're supposed to be going in, and you're putting all this effort in and it's not translating into anything. Or it could be a very, very negative environment or a culture that you might have inside that organization, right? And I think in both of those scenarios, that has typically been kind of the starting point of something going really, really wrong, right? And then as a result, might not start taking care of yourself, start sleeping correctly. I think Simon, you touched on a point of just like putting your head down for 6 months, trying to get things done, trying to move things forward in a culture that doesn't support you making that progress, and in a direction that isn't going in the direction that you want it to go in, right? And I think that's where it just starts kind of piling on. It's like, no matter what you do, you cannot change the direction of this problem that you're currently in, right? And I think everyone here has started talking clearly has some level of standards, right? And I think that's a problem when you start to drop some of those standards, right? We start to have that negative impact on you, and you might start questioning yourself when you start actually having that burnout. And that's definitely something that I've done, is when I'm absolutely exhausted, I've got no strength left, I'm questioning, my ability as an individual, or my capabilities, and I don't see other people having a burnout. I mean, what's kind of wrong with me, kind of a thing. So there is I think, yeah, there is a really fine line here. I've been in scenarios where there are things which I'm absolutely in love with, working stupid hours, and not in for one moment am I not enjoying myself. I'm having a blast all the way through it. And there are times I'm like only like 5-6 hour sleep days for like 3 weeks straight, right? So I think that's the thing. It's that kind of vision, the culture, all of that stuff coming in. Is that healthy?
Your comment about support is actually quite important, I think, because I've been in other situations where it is pure carnage, and maybe I was working just as hard as when I was in that pharmaceutical. But actually, it's been fine. There's never been any hint of any form of burnout. I did some work for a gambling organisation about 2012, and that was 9 months of pure carnage, and I absolutely loved it because the people around me were supportive. We were all in it together. Where when I reflect on that pharmaceutical, that was very much management telling me, you do this, and when you don't do it, you get punished. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that support and that culture makes a big difference to the manageability.
Are we so now, like Simon, your example is now switched, right, to be similar to Graham's. Are we saying up until now that there is no such thing as burnout? It's just if you don't enjoy the work you're doing, you're going to think you're burnt out, but actually you're not, because if you do enjoy the work you're doing, the same amount of work that you do doesn't burn you out. What that tells me, there's no such thing as burnout. There's just incompetency.
No,
all it is people aren't very good at doing some things, and therefore they claim burnout. And actually, the elephant in the room is they're just not very good at their job.
No, I'm not sure we're saying that at all.
I think that's the most controversial I've ever been. I quite enjoyed.
Yeah, I think so too. No, I don't think that is for me.
So
I think for me,
argue against it then, because so far that's the pattern.
So for me, there was what happened. So when it manifested, when it manifested itself, all of a sudden things started becoming really important, like pointless little conversations with colleagues or decisions that were being made felt important, and they weren't. And only 6 months afterwards, I looked at it and I thought, why was I getting so upset by those sort of things? And I think about that gambling organisation. Nothing upset me. It was brutal. It was forthright, but nothing upset me. Whereas in that pharmaceutical thing, little comments that someone would make offhand in a meeting, I would potentially fly off the handle with. And the reality is because all of a sudden it had got too much for me. It was impeding my sleep. I wasn't really interacting with others other than just working. And it became all consuming. So the burnout was not just, oh, I'm feeling tired or I'm feeling knackered. I was reacting in a disproportionate and emotional way to things that were happening, and I could no longer, it was getting to me. It was genuinely upsetting me.
And you didn't, I assume then you were running the show, right? And you didn't have a support.
We probably don't need to dwell on it, but no, as to he's frozen, but yeah, the manager I had at the time wasn't stunningly supportive or useful. So
I think for me, Simon, it really is the culture, because that's the thing. I think the point about what Ab was talking about is is there such thing as burnout. What you're talking about for me is exactly that culture bit. It's you are going to get in trouble or we're going to get in trouble if we don't hit this, as opposed to coming up with a pragmatic way of let's, what do we need to get there? Is it realistic? Are we delivering this to a high standard or whatever? And kind of really coming together and being supportive, right? So I 100% agree and fully understand that. I've been in a lot of places where the culture and the environment has been very, very negative. And I think everybody.
What's more important then, Nadeem? What's more important, the culture of the teams not burning out or having perceived burnout because they're incompetent, or delivering on the target that we have set ourselves, whether achievable or not? What's more important, delivering the target or keeping the teams from perceived burnout?
So
Most important to whom?
Yeah, that's good, right? So what's more important to both then? The teams and leadership. Who have created those targets?
I want to flip your question, because I'm not sure that you can deliver on targets effectively if your teams are burnt out. Some of those things that we spoke about, like Simon mentioned, you start seeing problems instead of solutions. If you have your team in that mind space, how are they going to deliver to your targets? And I am going to contradict you, because I realize that might be a career limiting move at this point, but I also know that you don't believe what you're saying. But
Cut that out, Erica.
I
Cut
appreciate
that
you
out.
being I appreciate you being the devil's advocate, and I can see why you're asking these questions, because there will be leaders out there asking these questions, and I think it's important for us to discuss that. It's the psychological perception, right? So when I was listening to Adib speaking, I could hear a very conscientious, very ambitious, highly driven individual who cared about the targets, who cared about the results, who cared about delivering quality things. And his burnout almost came from the fact that he wasn't seeing a change. He wasn't bought into the approach towards that. So if you don't pay attention as leadership to individuals who are raising these things, you are limiting your ways of achieving those results, because the people who are conscientious and driven and ambitious are the ones that, if you point them in the right direction, are going to laser focus and hit your targets. And interestingly, it reminds me of something I was reading while I was doing my research on burnout. It is people with a personality trait of conscientiousness, which is I work hard, I'm very diligent, I'm very organized, and extroversion, which are the people who talk a lot, are very outspoken, make those networks, bring people together. Those two personality traits are the ones that suffer burnout most commonly. And maybe it's because of that you were talking about, Adib. It's I care and I'm not.
I will say, I think I think you both are really, those points are actually excellent. I will say I intentionally moved into leadership and strategy to better manage the delivery and everything below me, because one thing I've experienced is that leadership generally don't understand this very well. And you've got to face the company in the right direction and then come up with a phenomenal execution model to support that all to come together, right? So yeah, I mean, I 100% agree with you. What I'd say, Ab, around your question, because that is a phenomenal question as well, is what's more important? Is it hitting the deadline, or is it the culture? And I'd say, as a leader, it entirely depends on the scenario. If there's a legal deadline that you must hit and you just cannot move in any way, right? You have to be a little bit pragmatic, right? So you've got to maybe pull in whatever resources you can in order to make that happen. I mean, it might be a situation with COVID, whatever, right? You've got to push things through. I guess you might be like NHS, right? So you've got to be really bullish and come up with a model to solve a very imminent problem. But I guess that you can only go down that model sometimes, right? And you've got to be very, very pragmatic around what are the failure points here and who do you need to bring in to support that. And then I guess the other one is, if you are a leader trying to create a sustainable business that is succeeding over the long term, you have to build the culture. So I'd say it really depends on what scenario you're talking about.
It's an interesting point you raised there, because it means that certain sort of management type or skill sets might be sort of causing I guess more sort of ingrained problems. So think of a manager that knows they're only going to be there for a couple of years. Do they really care, as they're not invested in the business in the long term? And the other thing is use of contract resources. Certainly, when I reflect on some of the projects and programs I've done, you will probably treat the permies better than you do the contractors, because the contractors, that's what they're there for. They're there to get it over the line, and then they're gone. So
contractors are not allowed to have burnout. They're there to get the job done, right?
I suspect that
I'll stop now.
you need to be aware when you structure an organization, or when you think about how you're going to do these things, you need to make sure that you've got a management team that are firstly going to be supportive and thinking about the same thing and not just their own personal targets. And then secondly, the resources that you use to view them as long-term investments. And that's difficult when they're temporary staff.
Yeah, that's true. I'll get Adib. I'll go back to what, when you said if you've got like a regulatory or something like, a super hard deadline, that then maybe you can only go down that road or use that method a couple of times. I would suggest never use that method. I would suggest that absolutely the number one thing is the culture of the team and not the deadline. So in my other life, none of you know this because I never ever mention it, but I'm part of Serve on the international.
What do they do?
International Earthquake. I very rarely talk about it, so it's a big surprise.
You're very brave, by the way. Can I just get that in?
Thanks. I do a lot of work with charity. I don't like to talk about it. So we have this thing where obviously burnout happens. You're doing quite physical work, and the target that we're trying to achieve is the most important target, right? It's not delivering a deadline of regulatory issues. It's saving a life. So the target is very important. But we all suffer from burnout. Everyone on that team, if we worked as hard as we think we should be working, we will all suffer from burnout. The important thing, and we have a very flat structure, right? We've got one leader. Generally, you need one, but otherwise, it's a very flat structure. And it is our responsibility to look at our teammates and make sure that our teammates are not burning out. Because, as Maggie opened up, I think before we started recording, said that what happens is when you have burnout and you start making mistakes and you start getting tired of making mistakes, then what do? You work harder. And it's a cycle, a vicious one, because you can't get out of that. You just make another mistake and work harder, make another mistake. And fair enough, it might be leadership's role to go, hey, you're burning out. It's not, right? It's our teammates. And we should be encouraged, and leadership should allow us to say to our teammates, because even if you're doing something that you really enjoy, right? So Simon, you working at the gaming company, you really enjoyed it. But if you started to burn out, you would have started to make mistakes, but you wouldn't have stopped. And you needed peers to see that in you, because you won't stop yourself, but they will. And they can say, hey, Si, take a break. You need a break. So both, you need to have the openness and the transparency for someone in your team to go, Simon, take a break. And also, Simon, you need to be big and strong and say, yeah, okay, fine, I'll take that break. It's not a leadership thing. Leadership needs to empower that and allow that to happen. But it's an us thing. We need to do that for our teammates.
I'm saying, absolutely.
So the flip side of that is, how do you hold the boundary as a team where you do have, so C-level often they come into that role for 1 to 2 years with a very specific purpose. They've usually been hired to do something specific for the organization, and like Simon says, they might not really care how they get that end result. They might have been brought in because they're known for getting results, and they're doing it on the basis of the expenditure of the teams underneath them. So how do you as teams, as a collective, hold the boundary to that very senior leader and say, no, we're not all going to work late again this week. We don't care if you're buying us pizza. That does not cancel out, the amount of energy that we're having to expend.
It's difficult if that C-suite person has been empowered to do that. If, however, the organization has values as to we're going to have long-term investment in our staff, then there should be some form of, there needs to be some form of checks and balances. So single individuals in positions of power can't change detrimentally a sort of a culture. So
yeah, I think it is culture. I think it boils down to empowerment for the teams. And there's loads of examples, right? Steve Jobs, we don't tell people what to do, we hire them to tell us what to do. Right back to the new product development game with Canon, where it was, we're not going to tell you what to build, we're just going to tell you we want the best printer ever and it wanted to be the cheapest ever, go and build it. And they built it, right? Because they probably worked really long hours and they probably helped each other out as a team. I think it's down to empowerment rather than, and it comes back to when we were saying it's not self-inflicted. Self-inflicted burnout isn't really burnout, it's just I'm working hard because I want to.
I agree. I think if you have built that psychological safety on an organizational wide scale already. Having one person coming in being different is much more likely to get them to adapt to the culture of the company. If everyone under them is empowered to talk about it, even if you're in a leadership position, it's difficult to reverse this much progress because it's a mentality that's already adopted, right?
There's there's stuff that you can do at the organizational level and sort of, have at the team level, so the team are protecting each other. But then there's stuff that people need to, I guess, be educated on at the personal level, coping mechanisms, or being able to identify, because you mentioned self-inflicted burnout, but most burnout, I think, is self-inflicted. Conscientious people are trying to do the right thing or trying to drive. So one of the things that dawned on me afterwards is it's kind of like the different quadrants of your life. So at that time when I suffered burnout, when I picked it apart afterwards, it was because everything was about work. So therefore work was all important. So when work was going well, I felt good. But actually when work was not going so well, that was the only thing I did. And one of the things I consciously did for the years afterwards was I had hobbies. So, like martial arts or whatever it is. I made sure that I had a healthy relationship with friends that I saw fairly regularly, and I made time for the family, and those all of a sudden then work. So, and I think those are important things just in life in general, because then if one of those four quadrants is poor, the others make up for it, and then until that one rebalances. Whereas if one of those quadrants has taken over, and I think work is the one that very easily takes over everything, then all of a sudden you've got that imbalance, and when it's not going so well, the world feels like it's sort of not working so well. Has anyone else sort of got experiences of their coping mechanisms or things that they've done when it all feels a bit too much?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm in agreement on that, Simon. I mean, the reality is, regardless of what situation is, you are responsible for your own energy levels and monitoring and managing that, right? If you feel that, something's not correct, then I guess you need to deal with it. I think, what you were talking about was about switching off and getting away from the work, right? But I think there's also around how do you approach the work. I mean, I've been in a couple of scenarios where I'm like, you know what, I've got a list of things this big. Let's just go through Red Bull after Red Bull and plow through it, right? And sometimes, you don't realize that you're actually causing that onto yourself, and maybe that list of things that you're doing isn't that important. So there's a real balance here of managing those energy levels and dealing with your mental state of being able to just switch off completely. It could be cooking, right? This is something that I've started doing a lot of recently for my two boys. I'm just cooking like fresh meals every day. It's like the only 1 hour I have where I've got like no technology going on, besides watching kind of Gordon Ramsay trying to figure out how to make meatballs and stuff like that. But it's kind of the only major thing that's going on. You need something to switch off. I will say I've spent a lot of time looking at kind of high performance athletes, and a lot of these guys that do different things. Like Michael Jordan used to play a lot of golf, right? Whilst he's playing basketball, he could be playing golf, and like that's a completely different thing away from the court, right? And sometimes you need things outside of the expertise or whatever it is that you do to allow your brain to come back to it with a fresh pair of eyes. I mean, that's a really difficult thing to ask for, but you need to do that because you will come back at it stronger and clearer and more focused. So, I mean, yeah, I think as an individual, you need to really manage that.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I wouldn't advise the Red Bull after Red Bull. Other energy drinks are available, obviously, but I wouldn't. Yeah. And there's one thing that you said, right, about managing the list. So one thing is, yeah, go away, do something different that you can improve at, right? That's the thing. If you take, Dan Pink's kind of stuff about intrinsic motivation, go do something else that you can get better at on your own terms. That's brilliant. But it's managing your workload. And another thing Maggie said at the beginning was, like, these things are in Agile, right? We know it, and it's the reason why we break things down into small chunks. Fine, in stories or whatever, but the reason why we break them down into small chunks is, yes, so we can be predictable, but also there's a sense of achievement. There's a sense of achievement every time you finish one of those things. If you've got this giant thing to do, and you just keep on chipping away at it, especially if you're only temporary and you don't get to finish it and then someone else comes in. There's no sense of achievement. But every time you finish a story and, you know, color in the chart or ring the bell or woohoo, you know, that's the sense of achievement that keeps motivation high. And we, as we said, right, motivation means that we don't ever get burnout, because burnout doesn't exist.
And if you can show it to the customers as well and get the validation, this is the right thing, it brings the purpose back into it as well.
Yeah, which is the third part of damping stuff, right? So do something you can
Absolutely.
get better at, do it on your own terms, and then see the purpose of what you're building. Then you're racist.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it doesn't need to be so beautiful as well. I mean, again, you just like, you scribble something out. Hey, what do you think of that? Yeah, that's going in the right direction. I mean, like, you feel you're making that progress, right? It doesn't need to be, you know, full blown, you know, redundant servers and stuff like that before you show a thing to a customer. A simple scribble, like, you know, what do you think of this? Oh, actually,
that reminds me of something. So 7 years ago, when I got married, I think it was 7. Let's go with 7. I hope it is 7 now. So,
Oh God.
and I had to send out my thank you letters, and it was just a task that I was like, oh, such a task, and I don't want to do. And then my wife said, well, why don't you just do like a couple a day? And therefore you'll get that sense of achievement. Then you'll do more, and then you'll finish it. I said, nah, that'll never work. That'll never work. I'll just bash it out.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think I might do that. I've still got them. I haven't sent them out yet. I think I'll do this test. This is an excellent A/B test. It didn't work for 7 years. Let me try the bite-sized way. See if it works. I'll report back.
Alternatively, I can get the addresses of all of those people and send them sort of, you know, a helpful dartboard with your face on it that they can, an ungrateful client or something like that.
Yeah, thank you, because I know what to do.
I can probably make swift business.
I will say there's one other thing I've started doing recently as well. So I used to do lots of kind of to-do lists, right? And the thing is, the problem with to-do lists is it doesn't mean that just because you've done it, you've actually achieved anything. And I don't know if this thing exists, but I've started coming up with an outcome list, like every single day. What's the outcome that I'm trying to achieve, right? So if I'm going to do, you know, like one of them used to just cook dinner, right? But you know, the outcome now is cook nutritious dinner and teach kids, my kids about how to cook, right? That's a slightly different. I'm going in there with a different mindset. Not need to quickly get this thing done. Let's get the before done. And the thing with the outcome list and like how you approach life is, it requires a bit more time. It requires a bit more kind of creative thinking as to how you're going to get there, right? But you know, if I quickly just dumped a dish on my kids, you know, for my kids to eat, I haven't really achieved anything.
One of the things I think, you know, we've discussed and we've agreed that one of the causes of burnout is the fact that they're sustained. So, and it's a sustained poor way of working or a sustained poor environment. So therefore, as sort of, you know, new agile ways of working or new ways of working are building in a sustained model. You know, it's just a continual machine. It's how we make sure that that model cares, you know, has that care for the employees and also encourages individuals to care for themselves. So because they build in rest periods, so they make sure that they have a healthy way of working, because otherwise, you know, that build up of burnout until it's suddenly too late and you suddenly, you know, you're burnt out and you can't come out of that spiral. That's too late.
Yeah, we do say it, right, in the manifesto that it's got to be sustainable, but then we also say in Scrum anyway is that we want to increase our productivity. We want to always try and get better. We want to try and do more story points or add more value. And is that putting pressure on the teams? Because yeah, they can get to a sustainable pace, but then as soon as they're sustainable, we're like, now do more. Now you got sustainable. Now do more. Now deliver us more. Get better. Get faster. Surely that should be an intrinsic thing. Surely that should be the team saying, I want to get faster, not absolutely. I'm being told to get faster.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd also say definitely, and this is something I came across recently, don't measure yourself against other people or other organizations. You have to look at yourself as to where you are. I mean, if you're going to compare yourself to a Messi and you've only been playing football for 2 weeks, I mean, you're setting yourself up for failure from an expectations point of view. I mean, if you can incrementally improve yourself by 1% here and there, or as an individual or as a team, you understand where you are and you make those progresses. Don't, I mean, you can get inspiration from others, but you have to understand where you are, where's your starting point, and then how do you continue kind of like, improve on that.
Yeah, and humouring Abbas in what he was saying about it's just incompetency, potentially. Incompetency by whose merits? Because what if the job that you're doing, everyone says, oh, you're doing an amazing job, this is so good, and you think, this is crap, I could do better. And then you keep pushing, and that's how you get yourself burnt out.
Yeah. Dropping perfectionism, I think, was a really big game changer for me. It's that it doesn't have to be perfect that you were talking about, Adib, and it's even questionable, like, is there such a thing as perfect? And who is to say what it looks like, right? And I think another one for me was setting the realistic goals that you were talking about, like what is actually achievable here, and then seeking out collaboration opportunities. It's not necessarily about taking a holiday, right? Like taking a holiday maybe helps with fatigue, maybe even exhaustion, but not burnout. It's those small changes that you implement in your day-to-day work that makes the difference. So small tasks, prioritization, super important. Put perfectionism in the bin. Think about where you can get help. Don't feel bad asking for support, asking for someone's evaluation. It might turn out that sometimes your standards in your head are so much higher than what is being expected, and maybe even delegate sometimes.
So that comment you made earlier about 80% of folk sort of suffer burnout, and that's something that sort of folk need to be aware of. That your comment about the deep, what's wrong with me? Why aren't other people? Actually, other people are. Yeah. And it's like this perfect world of everyone with their Facebook or their Instagram sort of presence versus reality. Actually, things aren't going so swimmingly. And you only discover it's not going so swimmingly when they suddenly vanish. So I think it's the realization that actually everyone has similar challenges, and collectively we fix it, rather than sort of I'm a single broken individual and everyone else is perfect.
Yeah, no, I think there's a mind shift change here. I think that word perfection, about throwing that one in the bin. I'd say also failure, you need to throw that one in the bin, because there is no such thing as failure depending on how you see it. Right, there's a learning from things that might have not gone the way how you need to do, but as long as you take that and you do something with it, that is definitely not failure. I think I think there was an interview with Kobe Bryant, and like somebody was asking that same question to him. It's like failure does not exist. I mean, there is no such thing, and a lot of people don't understand that.
I did a cool thing with one of my Scrum teams once, and at the stand-up, instead of saying at the retro. Instead of people saying, went well, went badly, I got them all to tell me something that they failed at during the last sprint, and everyone had to fail at something in the last sprint. So it turned failure from something that you should be ashamed of to something that you aspire to. And actually, if you fail at something, it means you're pushing the boundaries a little bit. It means you're trying something new. And yes, some people succeeded at the new thing and some people failed at the new thing, but everyone was encouraged to say one thing that they failed at. Brilliant. I think I might do that again. I quite enjoyed doing that. I forgot all about that.
I was chatting to a friend the other day that's in a very stressful environment where they had to counsel people who have been through sort of horrific incidents, or have got friends that are paramedics. They, I guess, have different challenges and different, we work in IT. The reality is some of our pressures are less. However, it's the perception, I guess, of our problems and the support we have around us, and the coping mechanisms ultimately will probably be the same across different industries because they're individual coping mechanisms. Be interesting actually to now we talk about it, and as it needs to be a sustained approach. Be interested to maybe get someone that's got experience in that sort of stuff. That could be quite useful for sort of advice and mechanisms that we give for agile ways of working. That's one for us to maybe follow up on. Do you want to wrap us up, Maggie?
Yeah, I guess how do we summarize what we covered so far? I think we're all in agreement that awareness on a business and individual level is something that's required, as well as measures from the business side to create the culture that cultivates happy people who don't burn out. But also there's a responsibility on the individual to work on coping mechanisms and develop strategies to deal with stress when it does come about. I think we all agree on that. Was there anything else in the kind of big sort of summary that we wanted to add?
I changed my mind. I believe that burnout is real. And it's not just incompetency.
I was already preparing my Abastinani Guy Fawkes dummy for for the end of the year. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. It's the organisations need to be aware of the fact that it exists and make sure that whatever sustained model they've got, it's not damaging their investment, which is their people. And then people also need to be aware that they need to take care of themselves, and when organisations give them help and advice as to how best to do that, or they make sure it's part of their own personal objectives, everyone's personal objectives to develop those coping mechanisms, then it's tackled from both sides.
And also keeping an eye, I guess, on yourself and your colleagues now that we have that awareness every now and then with yourself and colleagues. Is everything okay? Send them a funny GIF. See how they are, if you can help with something.
Can I ask you actually if you had any burnout personal experiences that you wanted to share?
I did actually have one, but I thought the conversation was going so well. And also I think you covered a lot of the points that I wanted to raise by sharing my one. I felt like it was good to let it flow naturally, but I'm also happy to share. And I was an older than other student. I was self-sustaining, so I was funding my own university. It was very different experience to everyone's 18, coming out of home, their parents come over to pick up their laundry and do it for them and return it and stock up the fridge. I was worried about finances, and because I had invested in my own education, I was really worried about performance as well. I had set these really, really high goals and expectations on myself that I realized at the end that I didn't have to. I think I ended up finishing university with like the highest dissertation mark from the whole year, the highest overall grade from the whole year. And I was looking, I remember there's like a big ceremony in Canterbury Cathedral for graduation. And I was looking at all these pieces of paper, they were like, you're great, but I was feeling terrible. It was the worst time of my life. I struggled so much, and it filtered into my personal life as well. I couldn't do anything properly. I didn't want to do anything. And it took me probably about a year to shake it off, because it's not about taking a break and going on holiday. It kind of goes with you. If you let it build up to that stage, you can remove yourself physically from a place, but it kind of jumps in your suitcase and travels with you. So it was very hard for me to shake it off. And I was young and I didn't have any good coping skills in my bag. So that was very, very, very difficult. And I also had another one more recently. Okay, this is full Brené Brown vulnerability style disclosure. So this is how what we were talking about, the human being is quite complex. It's not just about working life. We have life outside of that, and that can also be stressful sometimes. So I had a pretty rough year. I had a death in the family, a difficult breakup, and those personal things in themselves were putting a lot of strain on me mentally. So instead of doing the healthy thing of dedicating myself to ex-boyfriend social media stalking and bad-mouthing him with my girlfriends over cocktails, I decided I'm going to focus on this new role that I had just been offered. So really, really steep learning curve, a big challenge. New challenges are great, right? Fortune favors the brave, right? So here I am, all brave, ready to conquer, prove to myself and the world that I'm strong, I got this, but I'm already more shaken than like a James Bond martini, out of my comfort zone, learning a new trade in a business which at the time was undergoing a lot of change. So you can see where this is going. I started burning out. And the scariest thing is that it was unbeknown to me. I think I had a brief glimpse of awareness that something wasn't right when I gave you this example earlier. I found my keys in the fridge for a second time. But then that moment was interrupted by a Zoom call. So I didn't think about it again until my work mentor at the time stopped me in the middle of some rant and said, Maggie, you're usually like a really positive, really cheerful person. Do you think you might be burning out? Like I'm seeing change in behaviors. And I'm pretty sure I said, no way, I'm being brave and powerful here, right? Burnout, that doesn't sound like me. I'm flaming up. I've got this. But they also did share an article on burnout with me, and I respected them a lot as a leader. I respected them a lot professionally. So I did read it, and just going through it, I was like, girl, you're ticking all of those boxes. And I think the strongest thing I ever did was to admit to myself that I needed a break. If it hadn't been for that person, I don't know if I would have caught it at time. It kind of brought it back for me. And now I'm aware and I think about it every now and then in terms of just checking in with myself. Am I okay? Yes, I am. Or with colleagues as well.
Both of those examples, sort of picking them apart, the first one feels like your entire environment was to facilitate your education. So everything was geared around. So therefore your money worries and everything was all tied in with the same objective.
Yep.
So that those four quadrant things, the balance. And the other thing you mentioned, you'd have problems, sort of, personal family life, because something with death in the family, that, relationship, and then you'd focused wholly on the work. And again, it feels like an imbalance in, an individual support structure.
You were so right. You put the 100%, the 100 blocks that you have, which are limited, into one single thing, and you're starving all the others.
Thank you for sharing that. It's useful to hear other experiences, because I guess it helps us pick it apart from different angles, as to, what really is the challenge, and how can we sort of develop systems to help support it.
You can always count on me to talk about myself, Simon.
It might be worth actually adding a quick message for anyone who is actually having burnout right now. There might be people who watch and they're actually suffering from burnout. Like, what do I do?
That's a very fair point. What to do about it and how to get help. We should probably think about. I mean, is there? So, what mechanisms are there to sort of a call for help?
The first one is always got to be to just talk to somebody about it,
Communicate.
even if it's not a work person, because just having the conversation, admitting it out loud, is a completely different. Even if you know in the back of your mind that you're having that issue, saying it out loud is like the first step on the road to recovery, because then you can talk that through with that person and at least try and understand it and frame it a bit about, right, how is this showing up for me? And what are some small things that I can do? And it might just be like going for a walk for 5 minutes at lunch to put yourself physically in a different location. Or what's a hobby that you used to really love doing that you've let fall by the wayside, and just try and do some more of that. Find a group of people to do that with.
I agree. We all have different needs, different things make us decompress and make us happy. Like, Adib, you like cooking. Simon likes going to jiu-jitsu. We have different strategies, but it's about understanding what is it that you need at this moment. And same for the work aspect of it. Maybe I struggle with perfectionism. Maybe someone else struggles with wanting to take too much on and wanting to do everything and not wanting to delegate out. So it's kind of identifying what those personal pain points for you are and then addressing them. But definitely communication is a first point.
I think what we've learned from the stats you gave and this conversation is that everyone most people have suffered some form of burnout. So therefore, share it with a friend, a confidant and family member, because you'll be amazed at sort of actually how supportive they will probably be. You don't need to sort of suffer in silence. I guess that's kind of it. Reach out to your friends and let them support you.
You can sometimes be in a scenario where it's like, I can't get past. This is it. I can't sink any lower. This is it. There is no hope. But the reality is things will get better. And I guess there's also sometimes when you hit this scenario, you can actually come out of it 2, 3, 4, 5 times better than what you were, because you've reflected on it. So I guess that's probably my key message. If you're suffering from it right now, is things do get better, and it can sometimes take a bit of time, and you may end up becoming a lot more stronger, more aware of who you are. But no matter what the situation is, like, deadline missed or whatever, there's more to life than that stuff. There's more important things to be focusing on than just kind of project related things.
Yeah.
So I guess that's probably what my key advice would be.
And I think, sorry, I just thought while you were talking, this is the last thing I'm going to say, I'm going to shut up. But if none of that works and you are feeling like there is no hope because it's got so bad, then there's always professional help and people who have studied and trained and put a lot of effort and learning into helping you. So there's no shame in reaching out for that either. There's options there through NHS, through private care. Reach out for professional help if nothing else works.
That comment that Eve made, that when you reflect on it later, the amount of times that when I felt down in my life or something seemed important, when you look back at it in 6 months or a year's time, you're like, it wasn't important. It just wasn't.
Isn't there is a mechanism, right? And you ask yourself, if you're like concerned about something, then you ask yourself, will this be important to me in 5 minutes, 5 hours, 5 days, or 5 years? And if it's not 5 years, then don't worry about it. Or so, I can't remember exactly what it is, but there's something like that.
Cool. Okay.
I guess Jerry Springer said it best, right? When he finishes every episode, look after yourselves and each other.